Thank you very much. So today we're talking about kind of an idea that came up a couple months ago. I did a webinar comparing design thinking as an innovation method with the lean startup method. And from that I got a lot of comments from people who thought that there was an interesting comparison and that maybe there was something about the two ideas that were compatible. And so I kind of built off of that idea for this conversation, which I'm calling a hybrid approach, to innovation. So, if just sort of to remind folks of what we concluded a couple months ago, Lean Startup versus Design Thinking. Lean Startup is really a great blueprint for innovators. It emphasizes ways to manage and measure innovation, particularly in high uncertainty environments. It's got this testing and learning, and it really focuses on a new kind of metrics. They call it, actionable versus vanity, but metrics that make sense for an innovator or a person in a startup situation where, market share, size of market, growth projections are really kind of nonsensical because of the high uncertainty that the product or service that you're developing will even be adopted by the market. So it's a really fantastic way to manage a startup. Design thinking, on the other hand, is more of a culture methodology, or trying to create a culture of innovation and innovation regularly. It emphasizes the sort of empathy part of the design process, really understanding human needs by employing the principles of anthropology, ethnography, collaboration, and it's just a kind of bias to action. So it also has a sort of a testing and learning cycle, which we call the prototype test innovation cycle. So there was a lot of similarities. The one thing about the Lean Startup, this was from Steve Blank, who's one of the guys who've written the most about this, sort of one of the founders of the idea. He noticed that a lot of startups, there was a survey from CB Insights that talked to 300 entrepreneurs who have failed startups, and they asked them why their startups failed. And for the majority of the 60-70% of the reasons was they didn't find a quote market fit. Yeah, that's a sort of Lean Startup terminology. What that actually means is they designed a product nobody wants. And that's because most startups in the Valley here, certainly and around the country, when I talk to people in Austin or New York or incubators in Boston, it's the same thing. The startups are technology driven. There's a visionary founder, has an idea, he or she thinks it's a great idea, and then they go looking for someone who wants it. And Steve's pointed out that that's a little bit of a flaw in that strategy, and that design thinking doesn't start there. It doesn't start with the founder's vision or a product in hand. It starts with a need. So, the assumption that that Lean is sort of a technology push and engineering-centric methodology is a bit problematic. Relies too much on the vision of the founder, and it doesn't include a sort of a front-end part of the process that is ostensibly not about solving the problem that you think you're trying to solve. It's about finding the right problem to solve. And so there's really a completely different front end to the process that suggested to me there might be a hybrid approach that would be best or optimum. Because design thinking doesn't find the market fit, doesn't assume a technology and then look for a market fit. It finds the market fit first, the need, and then selects an appropriate implementation. However, I'd have to admit that design thinking doesn't really offer the entrepreneur much of a blueprint for what to do first, what to do second. It's a nice process. We have the mindsets of design thinking like a designer, and then we have the empathy, define, ideate, prototype, test process, but it doesn't really tell you what to do first or second. It certainly doesn't address issues of market segmentation, technology platforms, your business or monetization strategies and architectures, ... right? So there's a big gap in it. It does create a culture of creativity, but it doesn't prescribe ways to create innovation through an organization or in a startup that there's no checklist. It's not actionable. So there's the process, empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And the big idea, I think, in design thinking is that what we're really trying to do with an implementation of a design thinking implementation in your existing organization in a group that's chartered to do innovation or to find new markets, or in a startup, which is probably a pretty rare case. Most people won't be involved in a startup in their careers. It's really about creating these new organizational behaviors, the behaviors of brainstorming effectively, the behaviors of a culture of prototyping. It's a culture of ideas and prototypes, and this culture of creativity and curiosity, rather than starting with skepticism, which is a reasonable place to start. Most business people are trained to be so skeptical about facts and to seek proof where data can be found to make good decisions. But when you're in a high uncertainty environment, in an innovation environment, the better mindset is a curious mindset, because no data exists about the future you're trying to create. So curiosity rather than skepticism tends to open up the solution space and give you more potential ideas. And it's a human-centered, empathy-based approach. So it puts the humans at the center. We have a diagram that we use a lot in the D School where we have sort of three circles in a Venn diagram. One is humans, one is technology, one is business. We believe you can come into this diagram from any one of those circles. You can have a business focus, a technology focus. But the underserved area is the human-centered focus, and that's why we have been exploiting that approach to innovation for the last, 50 years since the program started at Stanford. Lean's big ideas are the minimum viable product, something that allows the team to test a hypothesis, validate their learning with real customers in real commercial situations. This build, measure, learn cycle, which is sort of critical to the methodology, that they have actionable metrics rather than the traditional forecasting metrics, which only makes sense once you have a business up and running. When you're trying to innovate a new business, and you have fledgling products or early ideas, there's really no way to use those methodologies to help guide the actions of a startup or an innovative team. So they have these different form of metrics. Ideas are judged good or bad based on these metrics, which is about moving the customer's behavior towards an ideal behavior, typically an ideal monetization of the concept. And then it's a method of forcing decisions, which is very similar to our bias to action, where you have a MVP, you make a test, you get actionable metrics, and then you either persevere in that strategy because it's working, or you pivot. And pivot is the big idea. It's sort of a special, it's not just sort of randomly walking around trying to figure out who wants to buy your thing or use your service. It's really a very structured idea of changing either the business model or the product or the service offering or the method of distribution. There's a number of different kinds of pivots, but they are all designed to test a new hypothesis about the product. And when you find a fit between either the business model, the product, the service, and the market, then you pursue that, and you continue to pursue that until you maximize the possibility of a successful innovation. So these are great ideas. What's true about both of these things is they're both useful in situations where you have high uncertainty. Again, in the last webinar I did about the limits of design thinking, I want to make sure people understand design thinking, Lean, and these other methodologies. They're very useful in an innovation cycle. They aren't particularly useful if what we're talking about is, hey, I've got a product line, it's doing very well, we have growing market share, and what we would like to do is make a line extension. We have a product and we want to make one that's a little faster, we want to make one that's a little bigger, a little smaller. I mean, think the iPad was the innovation, the small iPad was just a line extension. That's not a particularly innovative thing, it's just make a smaller one of the big one. And then the really big one, I would argue, is a little more innovative because it has the pencil and the drawing thing, but mostly it's just a bigger one. So those are not what I would call fundamental innovations. In those cases, traditional methodologies of just, good blocking and tackling, smart design and innovation, or smart design and engineering work will get you to the next step. But when your markets are changing, or you're threatened by a competitor, or you need an innovation to organically grow the business in a nonlinear way, you've got to use these other methods. So in those cases, you have extreme uncertainty. The users don't tell you even though we're human-centered, we accept that users can't tell us what they want us to design. They can only tell us what's sort of wrong with their current world. They can't imagine the world in which your design, will change their behavior. And both of these methods assume that the best way to figure out what the future looks like is to just do have a rapid cycle of trying stuff, building and trying, building and trying, building and learning. Because other than that, you're just guessing about the future. And if you overinvest in a guess, you could run out of time, run out of money, be overtaken by other competitors, and your innovation will fail. So, I think the synthesis of these two ideas is the interesting place to look at. They both work on this ambiguous class of problems, what people call wicked problems, or you can't figure out the answer. There's no answer you can figure out because there's not enough data to figure out an answer. You have to move into that space with some kind of a process that's going to, figure things out for you. Lean Startup would benefit from this because outing this whole notion that the entrepreneur or the visionary leader has the right idea and we just have to go figure out who wants it is a pretty flawed method. 60-70% of the entrepreneurs in the survey said, yeah, we failed to find a market fit. Nobody wanted the thing we thought was so cool. And if we could add some blueprints or some methodologies around design thinking, it might improve its effectiveness as well. So I'm drawing particularly from a book by Dan Olson called The Lean Product Playbook, and what he's done here is he's taken the sort of Lean Startup thing and said, even that isn't enough of a prescription. It doesn't really tell you what to do on day 1 and day 5 and day 20 of an innovation team or a startup team. I had Dan come to speak in one of our classes. I just thought he's got a lot of really useful, really detailed information in the book, and would recommend people who are thinking about putting their own hybrid together to read that, to read Lean from Eric Ries, and then also probably David Kelly's book on creative confidence and on the design thinking methodology. So I'm drawing from those and I'm saying, what are the big ideas in that book? And it has shown up in other places. I've seen this discussed in terms of the role of product management. What do product managers do? They work in the problem space and not the solution space. Or what do design teams do? They work in the problem or solution space. So I'm going to draw this. I'll credit Dan's book for this framework, but I want to introduce one other idea that I think will help us synthesize and keep straight what's going on between these two methods. And this new framework is this idea of problem and solution spaces. The problem space is where the customers and their needs live. It's about needs. Needs are verbs. Needs are things people want to do. And we describe needs very specifically in the design thinking kind of methodology and lexicon. Needs are gaps in use, usability, and meaning. So gaps in use are very simple. I need to hang a picture on the wall. I have a screwdriver and I have a nail file. But what I need is a hammer. The things I have they're not useful for the tool I want. I need the right tool for the job. Many needs are simple things like, if I gave you the right tool, you would solve the problem, you'd be happy. Usability is also very simple now. You go to the App Store for your Google Play or iPhone, and you say, boy, I want to download an app that will help me make my pictures on my phone really beautiful. You download 2 apps. One, you can't figure out how to get the pictures into the app, and the filters are complicated and they don't work the way you think, and you make a lot of mistakes, and you're a frustrated usability experience. And the other app is Instagram, and it's super, and it's fast, and it's easy, and it lets you post all your beautiful new pictures to all your social media, and you go, this is the one I want, because it solved the usability problem. And meaning is actually, it seems hard to understand, but it's actually simple. Think about meaning in terms of one easy way you can understand it is meaning is typically expressed in our brand and brand experience. I only buy Levi's. I don't know why I only buy Levi's. I just bought Levi's. They fit. I like them. I'm not endorsing Levi's. They're not better than Wranglers or somebody else. But for $40, it's a pretty good pair of jeans and they always fit. And something about Levi's means something to me. It means something about my identity. It means something about maybe somebody else buys $300 designer jeans, and that means something to them. It fills in a meaning in their life that's important to them. Brands may be, in some cases, not a trivial example, but an example, a sort of vain example. But there's lots of products that we purchase because they mean something to us, and other products don't match those meanings because we believe in sustainability, because we believe in women's rights, or, so we buy Ms. Magazine, or we believe in reducing poverty, so we're part of, the human potential movement, and we donate to certain charities. So meaning has a huge impact in the need space. And the big confusion is people think the solution space is the same thing. Solution space is where product, services, and experiences live. People always confuse these two things, and I think when we get into this framework, it'll make more sense. A solution is the thing that solves the need, but it lives in a completely different domain, because once the solution is proposed, in addition to solving that need, it simultaneously blocks all other solutions from being present in that space. So let's go on and put this into sort of a little bit of a, making a little more sense. Okay, you've got your problem space. Let's say, let's find it's just this big bubble. And I'm going to argue that that the design thinking methodology lives primarily in the problem space. It's about problem finding. It's not about solutions. And I'll explain the distinction a little bit more. And the solution space, I'm going to argue, is what the lean startup methodology is all about. It starts with the assumption that the entrepreneur or the innovator has a solution looking for a possible problem to solve. Now, I'm going to add one thing to the design thinking model, which I always add. It's not necessarily a sanctioned D-School approved edition, but I believe it's critical. And it comes from this idea that you can't solve a problem you don't have, which is a good friend of mine, Dave Evans, is a common phrase. And what this means is we see innovation teams and teams of people just trying to solve problems over and over again, not accepting that the problem they have is what they must solve. This comes up around stuff in trying to do a process reinvention at your company, but you can't do it because the bureaucracy won't let you, because middle managers don't get it, because there's all these other reasons why you can't solve the problem, because it's not you, it's them. So we say you got to add accept. You'll see I've added a little purple accept hexagon to the process. And I've seen teams over and over and over again fall out of accept and start blaming other people for the problem that they can't solve. I've seen teams over and over again kind of wrestle with whether they're fully engaged in the problem. There's a thing we call gravity problems, which is it's about this accept framework. It's like, oh, gee, gravity, what's your problem? Well, gravity is really a bummer today. Well, why is that a bummer, Bill? Well, because I can't jump 10 feet in the air, and going up and down stairs, I feel so heavy. Gravity isn't a problem. Gravity is just a situation that exists. It's not something you can fix. So you have to sort out, when you start with the accept phase, what is true in the world, and what is the problem you're actually working on. And if you have clarity on that, we find that teams are so much more effective. So if you add accept, I want to add one more thing. In the old days, before we had the design thinking framework, Professor Bob McKim, who started this whole thing at Stanford, the whole design program, it called it the express test cycle phase. And that's the part where you're using this process of prototyping and testing, expressing ideas, and then rapidly iterating in the world to see when I provoke the world with these ideas, what happens? I don't even have a hypothesis about what my product or solution is. I'm just provoking the world with this process. And then I want to add the emphasis on the difference in the lean methodology, where they say build, measure, learn. Build, measure, learn. Build, measure, learn is a fantastic process for evolving your minimum viable product idea into something that's truly efficient and truly hits the need on the nail on the head. But in order to build and measure and learn, you have to have a solution that you're working with, not simply an idea that you're you're testing. Let me make it maybe even a little more simple. The fundamental unit of experiment in design thinking is called the prototype. the fundamental unit of measurement and action in the solution space in lean products is the minimum viable product. They're really, really different things. Now, I was talking to somebody, and he was saying, he was presenting this stuff at Google, and at Google the word prototype means the alpha code that you release for testing. It's a very highly refined, very detailed piece of thing. And so he said, I can't call it prototype because no one at Google's going to change their definition just because you guys did. So I call the thing that we make in design thinking before we have this alpha thing that we call prototypes, I call it a pre-prototype or a baby prototype. And that's fine, because the word prototype does mean in the engineering community typically a thing that you build to validate your design. It's a very, very rigorous exercise to prototype and validate things. And we use prototyping in a very different way. We simply use prototyping as a stand-in for this express test cycle, this way of probing the world to see what possible futures might exist. And that's totally in the problem space. We haven't decided what the problem is yet. So we're just trying lots and lots of things. It's very, very fast, very low resolution, very simple. Once we have determined through this express test cycle that we've got 2 or 3 things that really are starting to resonate with customer needs, then we move over to the solution space and embed those ideas, that what I call that nuanced data from the customer, into something that the customer can actually now experience as the product. And that's the minimum viable product. It's a very different thing. A prototype in design thinking exists almost entirely in the problem space. It's just about determining what is the real problem. It's a reduced dimensional idea. What I mean by that is it's not the whole project. It's not the whole solution. It's just asking one important question. So it never rises to the level of a minimum viable product because it isn't even a product yet. It's just an idea. But it's critical to probe the possible outcomes with this prototype test, express test cycle methodology to make sure that you're working on the right problem. Because over and over again, in the survey data and other data, products fail because they don't meet customer needs. But customer needs are discoverable through the design thinking process. The customer needs about what they want in the future, of things they can't even imagine, are discoverable in the design thinking process through this prototyping methodology. It's not a baby minimum viable product. It's a methodology of discovery. And the MVP exists completely in the solution space. It attempts to be the product and give you the product experience. And once you've got that experience, you have the opportunity to respond, do I like it or not like it? Is it valuable enough for me to pay $20 for? And all the other things that Lean is so good at kind of build, test, and discover. So if you see the sort of almost the ontological difference between these two things, one is a primary function of discovery, one is a primary function of resolution. They're completely different spaces. You get the idea that I'm pushing for the hybrid. There's another way of looking at it, and there's an old formula in business school that value creation plus value capture equals your sustainable business advantage, your strategic advantage. Much of what you learn, both in business and engineering, is about value capture. Six Sigma was value capture. Lean, the total quality management was value capture. Outsourcing is about value capture. Many of the engineering optimization methodologies, how do we bring the most cost out of it and get the most features out of this thing we're making? Because we've already determined that the value has been created. A customer wants this. Now, how do we capture it? And that's what line extensions and value engineering and that can sometimes just be, hey, we sell in the U.S. market, now we're going to sell in the Asian market, and the Asian market is 10 times bigger than this market, so we just take the same product, we change our distribution, we change our strategy, and we capture more value. Design thinking lives over in the value creation space. What is it that people actually want? What would they pay for? What will delight them? What creates a completely new problem to solve? And then mixing that with the idea of the prototype to discover this nuanced data, and then capturing that data in a minimum viable product creates the kind of hybrid that I'm looking for. It creates both the best of both worlds in a way that I think will make it really actionable for design teams, whether they're designing a product or a service or an experience, to really understand the way in which a prototype is different from a minimum viable product, that both are necessary to create this value capture, value creation cycle. Now, I haven't drawn it here as a cycle, but obviously, just let me go back one slide. Obviously, what's going on here is a connection between these two processes, which is fairly, I think it should be obvious, but it's fairly important to emphasize. I'll go through my original need finding. I mean, of course, I have a problem in mind. I want to create a new customer relationship management software. I want to create a new game application for my iPhone. I'm in a space. I'm in a domain. I have some ideas. Hopefully I have some experiences with customers in those domains, and I know them and like them and think there's some new opportunities. But before, we always say you don't start with the problem, start with people. Before I go down to solving the problem I think people have, I spend all this time with them. I do ethnographic interviews, I do observations, I do ride-alongs, I go to their homes. I was reading a story about the early days at Intuit, Scott Cook's company that created the very, very popular personal financial software, the Quicken software, and then QuickBooks and other things. But when they were originally doing it, they would go to stores and to computer stores, and people would be buying software, and they would say, "Hey, we noticed you just bought that software. Can we come home with you? And we'll give you $100 if you let us come home with you and watch you try to, use that software." They would literally just like sneak into people's houses this way and observe all the difficulties they were having trying to just enter simple financial data, and then they made what seemed like an obvious choice to set the original version of Quicken, which I remember using when it first came out, up just like a check register. It just looked like a check. And you would type some stuff in, and it would be like filling out a check electronically. And then the magic would happen when you went to do that check again, and it automatically filled in the name and the number and the vendor and everything, and you were like, oh my God, this is going to save me so much time. So once you've got that cycle of prototyping and you've discovered that little moment of delight, you go, okay, now I know what I want to do, and you move into the solution space. But let's say your minimum viable product falls short. Maybe people don't want to pay, for a checkbook software. Maybe they just think it should be free, or maybe you try a freemium model in some kind of a premium thing, or maybe people don't like the checkbook metaphor. But nowadays it falls flat because nobody fills out checks anymore. None of my students, I think, even have a checking account. I don't know what they would do with it. I did a poll because we were doing some stuff with financial services. I asked my senior class, was about 55 students. I said, how many of you have been in a bank in the last, 2 weeks? 0 hands went up. In 1 month, 0 hands went up. Okay, when was the last time you went in a bank? And literally the last time they have entered into a physical bank was when they were a freshman at Stanford and opened their bank account 4 years prior. So, my point is simply that you even with the best need finding and the best prototyping, you may discover in the product space, in the solution space, that you've missed the mark. You're just off by 5 degrees or 10 degrees. And so you may go back into the prototyping world to try to pull out a little more data. But this is the exciting part, because once you have a product, your vision of this solution to a need, and once you show the user a product, they'll say, oh, now that I see that, I don't want that. You know what I want? I want something else. Now, this is horribly frustrating, for most designers and engineers, because you thought you were really close to the solution. And what's happening is, as you show them a possible future, they're discovering that now that they live in the future where this product or service is possible, what they really want is the thing that comes next. And that's the magic of this process. That's how the user guides you to the thing they don't even know they want. and you come up with a nonlinear, amazing innovation that's so delightful, that you end up, as Intuit did, taking over the market. By the way, they're proud of saying they were the 46th mover in that market. There were 45 other software products trying to automate checkbooks, including a Microsoft product, which was the dominant product. And they blew them all of them away. And Scott Cook likes to joke about having the 46th mover advantage. Okay, so I think I'm going to go back to the value capture, value creation slide. That's the core element in this hybrid, is that we're going to split these two methodologies in a very logical way, problem space versus solution space, and be, as we say in the design thinking mindset, mindful of the process. Where are we now? Are we in value capture mode, doing minimum viable products, seeking to extract the most revenue, delight, whatever, from the customers we can? Or are we discovering we have to go back and question our assumptions and use the more open-ended methodologies of ethnography and observation to understand where the new need now lies? So the takeaways are, I think once you have these two ideas, the problem and solution space, it kind of makes the distinction clear between what's a prototype and what's an MVP. The value creation and problem finding occurs mostly in the problem space, and the value capture and problem solving occurs primarily in the solution space. And remember, once you've reduced things to solutions, you've eliminated all other solutions. So you've collapsed your known world down to a very, very small singular idea. If that idea proves to not be true, which it often will be in your first few iterations, you want to move back into the problem finding space so that you don't get stuck trying to find a market fit for something that has no market. I think you have to accept the design thinking process, because without that, oftentimes I think the thing that happens in startups is they work so hard on their idea that when nobody wants it, they just keep trying to find somebody who does, rather than kind of accept that, hey, we designed the wrong thing. That's a very hard thing to do, particularly if you spent a year designing the wrong thing. A guy used to work for me, just went to work for a startup. He's going to be their first design manager, and they have $15 million of funding, and they have a product which is, in fact, I can't tell you exactly what it is, but it's an input device, like a keyboard or a mouse. So you would imagine human testing would be an important thing for an input device for humans. When he got to the company, he said, okay, you guys are a year and a half into this, you got prototypes and everything, show me all the user data, and then I'll build from there. And he said, oh, we've never shown this to a user, ever. So I'm astonished that you can raise $15 million for a user-centered input device and never have talked to a user. Anyway, he'll fix it. He's a really smart guy. I think they'll have a hard time accepting that people don't like their solutions, since they're, $10 million in a year and a half into it, if it turns out users don't think their new way of doing input is so cool. Iteration in the problem and solution spaces is the key to overcoming this uncertainty, high uncertainty. You're trying to collapse the uncertainty, reduce risk as fast as you can. And this hybrid idea, I think, is going to be more robust than either one of the methodologies, by itself.
So we now have time for some questions, as Bill promised. So Bill, this indeed was quite a dense set of slides, and we've had a few people that were interested in some more examples. So one of the questions that came up is if you can give an example of how you use a prototype in the problem space, in the problem finding space.
Mm-hmm. So let's see. I've got a group of students who are working right now on kind of reinventing dating. There's been a lot of activity in the sort of social network space with Facebook and things like Tinder and then all the sort of desktop or online versions of things like Match.com and eHarmony. And they went out in the world and discovered that people are pretty, there's a group of people pretty jaded with this sort of fast dating stuff, and they're not really interested in that kind of an experience. They're kind of post-Tinder folks who really are looking to have relationships. And they had a hypothesis that came from the observation that came up in 3 or 4 or 5 of their interviews that, some of the best dates I've ever been on, some of the best relationships I've ever had were when somebody else said, hey, Bill, you really ought to go talk to Debbie. Debbie is perfect for you. And you're thinking like, Debbie? Well, Debbie and I have nothing in common. And essentially they went back and reinvented the old concept of the matchmaker, right? The yentl in Fiddler on the Roof. And their hypothesis was that people might, that there would be a group of people who aren't dating, but who would really enjoy being part of the process. So they threw up a website. They bought some AdWords on Facebook. The dominant demographic in Facebook is women 25 to 45, and said, "Hey, who wants to be a matchmaker?" And they weren't testing the algorithm. They weren't testing the whole product. They were just testing a notion that maybe forgetting the people who wanted to have, a reliable way of making matches that turned into relationships. Maybe there was this other group of people who just wanted to be part of the process because they liked folks and they liked helping and they were nosy and they were expecting from the work they were doing and the typical response rates, if they sent out an ad, they might get 5 or 10 volunteers, and they got 500. And so that prototype told them, wow, this little, we had some observations, we turned it into what we thought might be an insight. Maybe there are people who want to be involved in this process who aren't actually dating. Ran a very simple prototype. It took them less than, half a day to figure out how to get something up on Facebook and have a landing page, and ended up, with an overwhelming reaction to the idea. So that's a positive one. I can also think of many prototypes where people were, I had another group that was trying to figure out ride sharing. This was before Uber and Lyft. And they had a thought that maybe people would just if they had a way to easily, jump in somebody else's car, they would do it because that would help them get around. And so they parked cars down at the train station here in Palo Alto and put a sign up saying free rides anywhere. And absolutely nobody would get in their car. They thought it was some kind of a scam, or they were creepy, or they were going to be murdered or abducted. And that was a prototype that failed completely, and they learned that actually the biggest issue, and this also comes up with Uber and Lyft, is trust. It's about whether you trust the person's motivation who has the vehicle. So in both cases, one a complete failure, they got no participants, and one an overwhelming success, they got lots of participants. It was less than a complete product. It wasn't even close to, testing the product idea or what the value would be or what you'd pay for it. It was just, would this one observation turn out to be true? If that was true, could we build off of that and find some more data? That team, by the way, is now building up the whole product, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see if, matchmaker augmented Tinder plus matchmaking plus eHarmony, equals a place where you can actually find, serious relationships in your life.
Thank you. So another question, if you were talking to people who really believe in the lean startup process, they would probably say that the lean startup also does value creation and also has a problem in mind. What would you say to these people, or what examples can you share around that?
I'm not suggesting that it doesn't have that, and in fact, if you look at Dan Olson's book, the one I recommend, he spends 2 full chapters sort of building out what is essentially the need-finding piece of lean. So it's the model has that in it. I think it's fine. I think we have an expression in the engineering school: all models are flawed, but some are useful. We know that the models are going to evolve and get better and better and better. I think if you were to pop open the lid on design thinking and on lean, you'd find that design thinking is 90% empathy. It's all about having insights into human behaviors. All of the tools and methodologies, we have 2 full classes on just the need-finding methodologies as part of the graduate program. So the emphasis on that means there's not as much emphasis on business processes, and in lean there's an emphasis, yes, there's a value creation component, but compared to de-thinking, it's pretty sparse. And the stuff that has been added is essentially, all the empathy, ethnography, user, observation, and other stuff. So these things are going by different names. They have slightly different overlaps. I'm suggesting not that there's an argument that one is better than the other, but that using the best of both sets of tools might create a hybrid that's more useful.
All right. We have a question from a person from a large company who says he leads a few teams of engineers who are deeply immersed in the solution space and are very well versed in that, and is wondering how you can add more design thinking components to either their team activities or their organization more broadly.
It's the biggest issue that we face when we're doing training with teams from large organizations. And typically the innovation teams are, heavily engineering oriented. And engineers love to solve problems, so they're always in the solution space. And they get, but engineers also want to see their stuff work. They want to see it in the world. They want to see people using it. Nothing's more exciting to an engineer than to see people using their products and being satisfied. So the engineers are constantly frustrated because they keep asking, marketing, tell us exactly what we should make, so we will make the perfect thing, exactly what you tell us, and then we'll make it, and then the people will love it, and then they don't love it, and the products fail 70% of the time. So the engineers are incredibly frustrated because they've solved the problem they were given, they've solved it very well, and yet it generated, no revenue, no market share, no success. So I think most engineering teams know the process is a little broken, and this is the accept part. You can decide to blame marketing if you want. That's fine. You can decide the problem isn't yours, it's marketing's. Or you can decide, hey, we're part of the solution. So the number one thing, and this is actually hard to do, the number one thing to do with engineering teams is get them out of the building and onto a customer's site, wherever the customer is that uses the product. If it's in their home, you're in their home. If it's an enterprise product, you're in their enterprise. But you have to be there, and you have to watch them do the thing that they're trying to do. It's hard for two reasons. One, I used to do this with Apple engineers, and the Apple engineers, just like everybody else, would go out and watch users struggle to make something happen on a Macintosh. And then they would go, what a bunch of stupid users. Why are we only looking at the stupid users? Let's go. There must be people who know how to do this. And my point was, there's no such thing as a stupid user. There's just a product that's hard to use. But when engineers get into the sort of empathy realm, they don't have to do the interviewing. They don't have to do anything. Just watch. Just watch people using the product. Not talking to your sales guys and have the sales guys tell you how to use the product. Not talking to the marketing people and looking at the market, the market requirements document, the MRD. But to literally go, on a ride along with a cop who's using your product, or a ride along with, a sales guy who has to use your Salesforce software, or ride along, with somebody at home who's got, trying to get the kids to daycare and figure out how to use this piece of software that's supposed to make her life easier. It's just making her life frustrating. It's almost impossible once you accept that it's your problem to solve to not have some empathetic reaction to the person's problem. And then it just takes a little guidance to realize, hey guys, we've been working on the wrong thing. We can totally solve this problem, but we didn't understand it. And if you can get that to happen, it's great. Now, the two things that prevent that from happening are your boss says, you can't leave the building. What are you doing? You're supposed to be doing engineering. Leave that stuff to the marketing people. So that'll be the first objection. And the second, once you get, just ignore that and go anyway. And once you get out in the field, this next objection will be that, engineers, this is very uncomfortable. This is real. It's messy. You're not just going to learn about the problem she has with your software. You're going to learn about, how difficult it is to get the kids to daycare and what happens when one's sick and why don't we have paid family leave. And she's not going to confine her observations to the things you're interested in. She's going to tell you about her life. But in that story of her life is what means that this is the use and usability. This is where the meaning part comes in. What does this mean to her? To have a solution to the thing you're trying to solve for, what does that mean to her? Does that mean more time with the kids? Does that mean more time for herself? Does that mean a better quality of, relationship in her world? If you can get people to just be uncomfortable a little bit until they're used to this kind of interaction, you can totally flip an engineering team into a design thinking team.
So a related question, somebody asked, would you recommend, if you're looking at the solution space and the problem space, would you recommend to have a team that mostly focuses on solutions and another team mostly on problems, or actually talking about hybrid, combine these in one?
Absolutely do not do that. Do not do the separation. The model is separated so you can understand intellectually what the activities are different. fundamental principle of design thinking is radical collaboration. Everybody from the people who are going to distribute and service the product to the people who are going to market it and advertise to the people who are going to actually invent it all need to be on the same team. Because you have to build a common data set of this nuanced data of users, funny, sort of weird, quirky interactions and what they really want, what they really don't want. Everybody needs to understand that because the problem comes in the handoffs. I believe that the marketing people have done an awesome job and taken all this observation and created this beautiful MRD. Then you can read the MRD and then you can build something exactly like that, and then manufacturing can take it and put it into the factory or software can put it up on the site and support it. But in every one of those transitions, something is lost. Something special about the human situation is lost. And so everybody has to be on the same team from the beginning, and that's another big challenge for organizations because people organize organizations around functions, not around projects, and so it's hard to get people assigned to the same team for the duration. But do the best you can in that area, and definitely do not confuse the model separation of these two domains with the way the workflow happens.
So if somebody was to take your advice and kind of send their people out to the field to observe and talk to people, is there a set of questions that you would recommend that they ask people, or how do you glean the most information about their experiences and the meaning that they give to things?
Yeah, sure. There's a bunch of techniques for doing that. There's a thing called the 5 whys where you just say, why do you do that? And they tell you, and they say, why do you do that? And you tell you, they almost never get to the 5th why. The 5th why is, what's the meaning of life? But you ask why 2 or 3 times. There's another thing called AEIOU, look at actions, look at experiences, look at interactions, I forget what they all are, but there's a whole model of breaking down observations as an ethnographer would do. There's a thing called an empathy map where we take what people said and what they actually did when they were saying those things, and then we hypothesize what they were thinking and what they were feeling. So we have half a dozen or a dozen frameworks for taking observational data and breaking it into stuff that can be actionable design data. There's a couple of books. Dev Patnaik, D-E-V. Patnaik, P-A-T-N-I-A-K, I think, is one of our need finding professors. He's written a book on this, and we could probably put in the notes some other references to some. There's a lot of great human subject testing design information out there. Fundamentally, you do always, you have a kind of a set of questions about, who are you and what do you do and sort of basic demographic stuff. You have a little warm-up set of questions to get people comfortable with that interview format. You have a set of questions that you're going to ask probably about the thing you're trying to understand. And my experience is you might get 1 or 2 questions into that, and then suddenly someone says something that's way more interesting than the questions you had planned. And then, like a good reporter, you just follow that lead until you discover what's really going on for them. Because you have to assume that whatever your questions were came out of a framework that you were kind of in the back of your mind hypothesizing a solution, and you were sort of asking, are these good ideas for the solution I'm thinking of? And so you've inadvertently crossed into the solution space with your questions. So follow the answers, not your questions, because no matter how good you are at this, you're not smart enough to come up with the right questions.
So, Bill, I want to thank you very much, and I want to mention, as I see the questions coming up on the screen here, for those of you who are able, enrolling in our Innovation Master Series is really a great way to ask all of these questions and to spend some time diving deep into these different concepts of empathy and need finding and prototyping and doing all of that with true experts that have had experience in doing this for years and years and in applying this in different companies and different contexts. So that's a great experience for those of you who are able to join us. I want to thank Bill again for this really insightful presentation. I think there's lots of interest, and it definitely touched on a really interesting connection between these 2 topics. Thank you, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
I just want to make one more comment before everybody signs off. A bunch of questions were around, well, doesn't this take longer to do all this research and stuff, and wouldn't it just be faster to go with the lean method straight to a product? I can't think of anything slower than spending a lot of time to produce a product no one buys. There's always time to do it over. There's never time to do it right. This doesn't take longer. If what you're talking about is, time to revenue, time to success, time to innovation, time to, saving the money that you wanted to save by reinventing a process in your organization, then it's actually significantly faster because it more often than the other processes results in success. So it's a false trade-off to think going quickly to the solution space and solving the wrong problem is faster. It's never faster. It's always faster to make sure you're working on the right thing.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Thank you very much. So today we're talking about an idea that came up a couple months ago. I did a webinar comparing design thinking as an innovation method with the lean startup method. And from that I got a lot of comments from people who thought that was an interesting comparison and maybe there was something about the two ideas that were compatible. And so I kind of built off of that idea for this conversation, which I'm calling a hybrid approach, to innovation. So, if just sort of to remind folks of what we concluded a couple months ago, Lean Startup versus Design Thinking. Lean Startup is really a great blueprint for innovators. It emphasizes ways to manage and measure innovation, particularly in high uncertainty environments. It's got this testing, and one of the guys who've written the most about this, sort of one of the founders of the idea. He noticed that a lot of startups, there was a survey from CB Insights that talked to 300 entrepreneurs who have failed startups, and they asked them why their startups failed. And for the majority of the 60-70% of the reasons was they didn't find a quote market fit. Yeah, that's a sort of lean startup terminology. What that actually means is they designed a product nobody wants, and that's because most startups in the Valley here, certainly and around the country, when I talk to people in Austin or New York or incubators in Boston, it's the same thing. The startups are technology driven. There's a visionary founder, has an idea, he or she thinks it's a great idea, and then they go looking for someone who wants it. And Steve's pointed out that that's a little bit of a flaw in that strategy, and that design thinking doesn't start there. It doesn't start with the founder's vision or a product in hand. It starts with a need. So, the assumption that that lean is sort of a technology push and engineering-centric methodology is a bit problematic. Relies too much on the vision of the founder, and it doesn't include a sort of a front-end part of the process that is ostensibly not about solving the problem that you think you're trying to solve. It's about finding the right problem to solve. And so there's really a completely different front end to the process that suggested to me there might be a hybrid approach that would be best or optimum. Because design thinking doesn't find the market fit, doesn't assume a technology and then look for a market fit. It finds the market fit first, the need, and then selects an appropriate implementation. However, I'd have to admit that design thinking doesn't really offer the entrepreneur much of a blueprint for what to do first, what to do second. It's a nice process. We have the mindsets of design thinking, thinking like a designer, and then we have the empathy, define, ideate, prototype, test process. But it doesn't really tell you what to do first or second. It certainly doesn't address issue learning, and it really focuses on a new kind of metrics. They call it actionable versus vanity, but metrics that make sense for an innovator or a person in a startup situation where, market share, size of market, growth projections are really kind of nonsensical because of the high uncertainty that the product or service that you're developing will even be adopted by the market. So it's a really fantastic way to manage a startup. Design thinking, on the other hand, is more of a culture methodology, or trying to create a culture of innovation and innovation regularly. It emphasizes the sort of empathy part of the design process, really understanding human needs by employing the principles of anthropology, ethnography, collaboration, and it's just a kind of bias to action. So it also has a sort of a testing and learning cycle, which we call the prototype, test, innovation cycle. So there was a lot of similarities. So one thing about the Lean Startup, this was from Steve Blank, who's of market segmentation, technology platforms, your business or monetization strategies and architectures, ... right? So there's a big gap in it. It does create a culture of creativity, but it doesn't prescribe ways to create innovation through an organization or in a startup that there's no checklist. It's not actionable. So there's the process, empathy, define, ideate, prototype, and test. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. And the big idea, I think, in design thinking is that what we're really trying to do with an implementation of a design thinking implementation in your existing organization, in a group that's chartered to do innovation or to find new markets, or in a startup, which is probably a pretty rare case. Most people won't be involved in a startup in their careers. It's really about creating these new organizational behaviors, the behaviors of brainstorming effectively, the behaviors of a culture of prototyping. It's a culture of ideas and prototypes, and this culture of creativity and curiosity. Rather